What's up, y'all? You're watching Union Minded. I'm your host, Eric, and today we are going to discuss Project 2025 as it pertains to unions, because Project 2025 is just a blueprint. It's just the latest version of a long line of blueprints that the Heritage Foundation has put out since 1981. And these blueprints have served to lead Republican administrations when they gain power and become the president. This is the plan for the country, and they've been at this since 81. Obviously the largest tax cut that really changed how the middle class would operate and started to shrink the middle class, when we went from 70% of a tax rate for the largest income earners and dropped that to, I think it was 35% or something like that. But anyway, it was a huge gash in taxes and services, and so schools started to falter and a lot of other things started to happen in a negative way, and we can thank the Heritage Foundation for that. Well, they have a new plan, a new blueprint, and it's just another page in this history to try to take us back to before we had any kind of worker rights. I'm sure the end result pretty much makes the National Labor Relations Act null and void and really just not worth the paper it's printed on. So let's dive in. Project 2025 is a GOP blueprint to destroy labor unions and workers' rights by Lawrence Whitner. All right, here we go. This week's Labor Day holiday provided an appropriate time to reflect upon how Donald Trump and his MAGA Republicans, if restored to power, will deal with the American labor movement. Much of the evidence on this score is available in Project 2025, which is a 922-page public policy agenda produced by the Heritage Foundation for the first 180 days of a new Republican administration. Ever since 1981, this exceptionally wealthy, conservative, and powerful Washington think tank has been churning out blueprints for incoming Republican administrations. In fact, the Heritage Foundation performed the same service for the first Trump administration, bragging after only a year that the Trump White House had implemented nearly 2/3 of its proposals. The Project 2025 policy agenda is far-ranging and includes many of the nostrums advanced by right-wing Republicans, including abolishing the U.S. Department of Education. You know, we didn't always have public schools. Before there were unions, we didn't have public schools. Kids went to work. Did you know that? Slashing taxes for the wealthiest Americans and corporations, building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, further restricting abortion, increasing oil and gas production. You know how hot it's been? It ain't getting no better as long as we keep doing that kind of stuff. Maintaining a biblically based definition of marriage and family, and ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. But few of the project's recommendations are as extreme as those dealing with America's unions and the workers they represent. And I want to also point out that this isn't just the unions and the workers they represent, because anything that happens to unions affects the working class on a whole. When unions do well, the working class does well. When union wages are up, wages in the same areas are up that are non-union. So I want you to keep that in mind. For example, Project 2025 calls for banning public employee unions, which are unions that represent like teachers, librarians, firefighters, post workers, police, clerks, trash collectors, and other public sector workers. As 32.5% of public sector employees belong to unions, they constitute the most highly unionized portion of the American workforce. Thus, the abolition of their unions would eliminate nearly half the union membership in the United States. Nor would the rest of the nation's union members, composed of private sector workers, that's IBEW, only 6% of whom belong to unions. Again, we only have 6% of the workforce. Nor would the rest of the nation's union members, composed of private sector workers, only 6% of whom belong to unions, fare much better under this Heritage Foundation scheme. Most notably, Project 2025 advocates empowering the states to ban labor unions. That means that individual states will now be able to outlaw being a union, or having a union, or being a union member. Even partway through existing contracts, unions could be terminated. Furthermore, it would become illegal for employers to voluntarily recognize unions, while businesses would be allowed to create their own sham company unions. Back in the day, before the National Labor Relations Act, there were sham unions. And those sham unions ended up with a lot of strife, and they were creating company towns where you used the company's money to buy company goods. This is history repeating itself, and if we're not wise to it, we will vote ourselves right into it. So that's just another part of it. Stripped of their access to union representation and the benefits unions bring, American workers would face further losses of long-standing rights. Project 2025 calls for allowing the states to ignore the federal minimum wage and overtime pay laws. That means they're going to just go ahead and be able to be like, no more overtime, it's all straight time. As well as for eliminating child labor rules that protect children from working in mines, meatpacking plants, and other hazardous workplaces. Right now, currently, Republican states are laxing the rules on child labor and putting those policies into place. So understand that this is not make-believe, it's not fantasy, it's not a conspiracy, it is an actual policy, and it is a policy that is guiding the GOP. Keep that in mind. This is not just fun and games and just talk and ha, I'm gonna stick my thumb in your eye and make you feel triggered and ha. This ain't about that. In these other ways, Project 2025 promotes a return to the distant past before the advent of legislation to prevent the abuse and exploitation of American workers. Again, we have forgotten where we come from. It's important to read history. You pick up a union or a labor history book and read about how bad it was and why you're able to work 8 hours and have the weekends off. You should do that. To safeguard the implementation of the Heritage Foundation's right-wing agenda, Project 2025 champions firing as many as 50,000 federal government workers and replacing them with Trump loyalists. Not surprisingly, once the extremist proposals in Project 2025 begin to attract not surprisingly, once the extremist proposals in Project 2025 began to attract negative publicity, Trump scrambled to distance himself from it. He says, I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it. Sure. Okay. All right. There's gravity to the decisions you make, ripple effects throughout time. Since 1981, these policies have been going into effect, and you've watched the U.S. education go from #1 in the world to not a high-tiered education system as far as the world is concerned. Probably in the 30s or somewhere like that. I don't have that number on the top of my head, so excuse me for that. But you know what I'm talking about. You've watched income inequality do the same. You've watched the income inequality reach levels that we haven't seen since the Great Depression and before that. These policies have been in place since '81, and we've watched the results. This is just the latest and probably an attempt at the final nail in the coffin. What this would do, this would not end the fight for workers to have a better slice of the pie. This wouldn't end it. But what it would do is take it back to where now you're going to need people to lay their lives on the line. Now you're going to need to pick up arms. You're going to need to shut down factories. It's going to get back to a bloody way of fighting for worker rights, because that's what it's going to take, because there's going to be no laws and no government to protect workers. Right now, the U.S. government policy is that collective bargaining is a good thing and union representation is a right. This will take that away. That's the bottom line. It would be a return to a real in-your-face class war as opposed to the subtle one that exists today. My name's Eric. You're watching Union Minded. Keep in mind that the fight's not left and right. It's up and down. It's going to take solidarity to win always. Each one teach one. Get out there and reach one. And remember, there could be no union without you and I front and center. Peace.